this is the meeting of the Evanston Plan Commission. The first order of business is declaration of a quorum.
Commissioner Draper?
Here.
Commissioner Dubin?
Here.
Commissioner Goddard?
Here.
Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Isaac?
Here.
Commissioner Pagotzi? Commissioner Sloss? Commissioner Hugo?
Here.
And Chair Lewis.
Here.
Have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So just to reiterate what I've said before, if you wish to speak tonight, you should have signed in on the sign-in sheet. I think the petitioner is fine. Anyone who is going to speak tonight, I will ask them at this time to raise their right hand and promise to tell the truth. Do you promise to tell the truth? All right, very good. Thank you. All right. Just a little bit about the purpose of this meeting. The Plan Commission is a public hearing to gather facts and information regarding a petition and to provide information with a motion to recommend approval or approval with refinements or denial to the City Council, where the final action will occur. We are a recommending body, and therefore nothing we do tonight is a final action. The first order of business is approval of the minutes of October 30th, 2019. Do I have any comments, corrections, revisions? I'm sorry, it is actually, these are the minutes of the zoning committee, correct?
No, these are.
The Plan Commission, okay, of the Plan Commission meeting. Hearing none, is there a recommendation to approve?
Move to approve.
Commissioner Goddard,
Second.
second Dubin. All in favor? Aye. All against?
Present.
And one present. All right. Very good. So the first item on the agenda for old business is a text amendment for municipal use exemption 19 PLND 0077. Ms. Jones, will you please introduce it?
Sure. All right. Good evening, commissioners and members of the public. Megan Jones, Neighborhood and Land Use Planner. This particular text amendment we saw a few months ago, so I'm going to backtrack a bit to give a little bit of background or a refresher of sorts. Our existing regulations within section 674 of our ordinance that allows the establishment of governmental or proprietary uses owned and operated by the city, regardless of whatever zoning district it happens to be located in. The municipal use exemption within the ordinance allows some flexibility of locations for those municipal facilities. As it exists right now, the municipal use exemption is essentially just a paragraph. It states that any municipal use is considered a permitted use in any district. The city council can approve these uses or buildings within any of these zoning districts, and they don't necessarily have to meet all of the requirements of the underlying zoning district. Now, if that is the case, what happens is we have the Design and Project Review Committee, or DAPR, review the proposed project and propose ways to mitigate any potential impacts to surrounding properties or the community that is nearby. So some of the existing uses and buildings that would actually have used this exemption include the Civic Center, which we are now sitting in, the recently constructed Church Street pumping station, the water treatment plant, water tower, and pump station, several of our city parking lots, and several of our city fire stations. So as I mentioned, this was first reviewed by the commission back in August, so several months ago. That discussion began, and basically some of the discussion points centered on a clarification of the language between a municipal use and a new construction of a building. Also, having these municipal uses follow the same approval procedures as non-municipal uses, and then a general request for some additional information on what other municipalities do. Ultimately, the commission voted to send this item to the zoning committee. In that meeting, which was held on October 16th, continued that discussion, and for the most part kind of centered around requiring additional review for larger developments that would be similar to non-municipal projects, as well as providing additional notice to the public. So given the discussion that occurred at the Plan Commission and Zoning Committee meetings, the staff went back and revised the proposed amendment. And since the packet that was posted on Friday, we actually did a little bit more discussion back and forth, and the chair of the Zoning Committee meeting, Commissioner Isaac, provided some additional information, and his edits are actually provided in red on what's proposed. So the following changes are what we are now considering. So for Section A, any governmental or proprietary function owned or operated by the city should be a permitted use in any district, except where the proposed use would otherwise require plan development approval. And in such event, the city shall comply with subsection D of this section. So essentially that's saying if there's a proposed project that would meet the thresholds for a plan development review, it would go through that plan development review. In Section B, where the construction of buildings and structures owned or operated by the city do not comply with all of the requirements of the underlying zoning district, the city council approval of the project is required, and the city council may authorize that construction if the noncompliance is necessary or beneficial for the city to perform the desired services, and the city takes reasonable steps to minimize adverse impacts on surrounding properties resulting from that noncompliance. For Section C, we have some additional changes. These would essentially be the sections that provide additional notice, which was a sticking point in a lot of the discussion. So for this would be if the city council approval is required, whether pursuant to subsections A, B, or D of this section, said project shall nevertheless be exempt from the variation review process set forth in sections 6 through 8. However, the Design and Project Review Committee shall review the plan construction prior to City Council taking action and provide recommendations regarding the minimization of potential adverse impacts by design, architectural treatment, screening, landscaping, and/or placement on the lot. So subsection 1 for this section states as prior to City Council approval of the project, the city will provide notice of the Design and Project Review Committee meeting through the use of a third-party service by first-class mail to all owners of property within a 500-foot radius of the property lines of the subject property, inclusive of public roads, streets, and alleys and other public ways from the area proposed for the development, whose addresses appear on the current tax assessment list as provided by the city. The failure of delivery of such notice, however, shall not invalidate any such review process. So this would be the portion of notice that would occur before an actual building is even really reviewed or constructed. Subsection 2 for this section actually deals with prior to the actual construction of a building, and that actually has the same notification requirements as that first section. So it'd be two different points within the review process that there would be some additional notice provided to the public. And finally, in Section D, where we mentioned similarities to the plan development review process, we have where, with respect to a project or a use proposed by the city, mandatory plan development minimum thresholds for that district are met. The process for review of plan developments, as stated in Section 636, shall be followed in lieu of the procedures listed in this section. So again, essentially, that review process would follow the same procedures as a plan development review. And here we have the standards for text amendments, which we can go through a little bit later once we are closer to deliberation for this particular item. So with that, I will take any questions or comments.
All right, so the process we'll go through is I'll open it up for questions from commissioners, then questions from the audience, and then we'll open it up to public comment, and then deliberation from the commissioners. So first, commissioners, do you have any questions on the information provided? Commissioner Isaac.
Yeah, I have a question. In Section C, Megan, if you could,
Put it back, yeah.
in subsection 1, it says, prior to city council approval of project, the city will provide notice of the design and project review committee meeting. And then that same phrase is in number 2. And I guess my question is there usually a design and project review committee meeting before approval and before construction?
Typically, and especially for our larger projects, there will be 2 separate reviews, so to speak, by staff or the DAPR committee. So it would be prior to a full approval of the project. So it may be a concept review or something along those lines where staff is giving their preliminary opinions and suggestions and requirements. And then once a project actually submits for building permits, prior to a building permit being issued, then a project comes back to the DAPR committee and we do the final reviews there.
So would it make sense to, include in number 2 something to the extent of, like where applicable or if applicable? Because if the meeting wouldn't otherwise, if the second meeting of the design and project review committee wouldn't otherwise be necessary, it would appear that this language would make it necessary unless we said, where that meeting is applicable.
That could make sense if it's something where the use is located within an existing building and there aren't any exterior changes. I can see maybe proposing some language there. But if it's going to be a brand new building, then there would definitely be those 2 meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? So I, also on the same section, I'm kind of missing that it says, prior to the city council approval of the project, the city will provide notice of the design and project review committee. So how much before a city council meeting do these DAPR meetings occur? I mean, it's not saying, to me, it should say clearly, it will give notice prior to the DAPR meeting, not prior to the city council meeting, right? So, I mean, you could give notice prior to the meeting, post-DAPR meeting. That's all it's actually saying here,
So,
right.
so essentially take out the prior to city council approval and say prior.
Say, well, it's more for the design review and project committee meeting prior to the city, shall give written notice prior to the design and project review committee meeting that is prior to the city council approval. Because it's strictly saying, you have to give a notice prior to the city council meeting, but not prior to the DAPR meeting. Is that true?
I think, Chair Lewis, the way it's written, it's notice of the Design and Project Review Committee meeting.
Yeah.
So it would be notice that on this date, at this time, DAPR
Okay.
will be meeting to consider that.
Okay, well, I
Commissioner Lewis, are you suggesting that maybe there should be a minimum time frame?
well, I would say that, yes. I only know in history, these kind of notice things have been abused by various organizations by giving notice the afternoon of the meeting or, seriously. I mean, and if we're writing something that's supposed to be, rigorous, I would hope that we would give, something that gives protections. I mean, that's the whole
So
reason
something
that we're doing this.
something to the effect of, issuing notice at least 30 days prior to the meeting, or 15 days or something.
So I guess I would ask Dapper, what's a practical time frame for when these meetings come up? Is it 1 week, 2 weeks, a month? You know, in order to keep the process rolling. And
Dapper meetings are typically weekly meetings when there's business. One of the other timeframes in the city code pertains to newspaper notice for projects where that's required. That's between 15 and 30 days prior to the meeting. I don't believe other sections have a strict time period for the mailed notice to some extent because we have less control over the mail and how quickly it goes out and is received. But if you're looking for a time period, 15 to 30 days would seem to be reasonable. That's generally when the mailed notice would go out.
no, so maybe no less than 15 days prior might be, although we're straying into deliberations, but all right. Any other questions at this point? Commissioner Draper.
So it looks like it's saying that we have to give out notices prior to the DAPR meeting, but it doesn't specifically say prior to the city council meeting? Am I misreading that? Should that also be a separate item?
With other projects, there's typically one mailed notice. So, for example, a project that's coming to the Plan Commission, there would be mailed notice of that. The timing of when it goes to City Council and their committees can be variable on a number of matters. So I think the idea is that someone has received notice, this application's in, it's being reviewed, this is the point in time when they can come to a meeting and be heard. And then when they have that notice, they can follow up on the project as it proceeds through the next steps in the process.
Are you still lighting? Did you? Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Great. All right. Anyone else? All right. So is there anyone who would like to ask questions? Ms. Safford, can you please come and state your name and speak into the microphone, please? Thank you.
Joan Safford, 1618 Wesley Avenue. My question actually relates to the same issue, which is that one of the notice issues that has come up is whether, whenever the city is planning to do something, is whether the public learns that before the die is so cast that there really is no possibility of having significant input about the underlying decision, or there's an equitable argument later that, well, the city wanted it, so we did it. And so why are you giving us a problem? So my question really is this notice to the public? It's the same question, but I think it needs to be made more precise in the ordinance. Is this notice to the public coming prior to it surely should come prior to the city council's meeting to approve a request for proposal, for instance. I mean, that's sort of the stage you'd be at, which is pretty early in the process, but allows neighbors to speak. And then the question is, when's the DAPR meeting in relation to that, if it's just a concept? And I mean, this is a different, which is one of the reasons you're doing all this. You're thinking of different procedures than you would have if this were a regular plan development or a regular special use.
So I think there was a question there, and I think the question was,
There was
what is the sequence of events relating to the DAPR review notification, the DAPR review, and then the city council meeting?
The initial city council meeting to approve the project.
Right. So I believe the answer is that the DAPR meetings occur prior to it ever being motioned to put on the city council agenda. Is that correct?
DAPR would typically approve a project where there's some plans for the project, so a site plan, building elevations, landscape plan, items like that. So I think it is a good question of, which will again be variable depending on what the project is, whether it's something that's maybe some staff genesis as far as the project, or whether it's a project where the city council would be allocating funding or going through an RFP, RFQ process for a project. When it's conceptual or trying to determine whether to establish a project or not. So I think it's a good question. As far as DAPR in this process, typically there is a project when it comes to DAPR.
All right, but do all projects that the municipality proposes under this ordinance have to be reviewed by DAPR? Is there, so we're struggling over the language of this because we're saying you have to give notice of the review committee hearing prior to city council meeting. But if that's not always going to be the case, then there needs to be a next step of, then you give notice prior to the city council meeting. No? So-
I think the idea for this in subsection B is basically when there's something that's being constructed, at that point, these type of projects that are exempt would go through this review by DAPR. So if there's nothing being constructed, it wouldn't go to DAPR. If it was a use as filling an existing building, the one I've thought of most is like a police outpost in a commercial district, for example. So in that case, it would just be a permitted use, and there would be no further step in the process.
All right.
I think
And
this
that would
language
not
is
go-
contemplating if it's something that's being constructed, and then it's not being constructed with all the requirements of the underlying district, then city council approval is required, then DAPR review if that approval is
So
required.
anything constructed has to go before DAPR, but if it's inserted to within an existing use or something, then it's not necessarily going through that process. Just-
And I believe the way it's written is it's constructed and not complying with the underlying requirements or
Okay.
of a threshold of a
Okay.
plan development.
Commissioner Isaac.
Sorry, I've lost my question.
All right.
It'll come back to me.
May I insert my follow-up question then on that? If it's the case that the staff is contemplating, or city manager, whatever, is contemplating a special, what would otherwise be a special use or a planned development, because it does not conform with the zoning and other requirements in a particular district, at that early stage, if we're not yet talking about construction itself with a plan that could be reviewed by DAPR, then we're talking about the city council agreeing to a plan to put something that is non-conforming, we don't know what it looks like, but put something that is non-conforming in a district where it would otherwise not be permitted. And so then the question comes up as to whether, and I don't know the answer to this question, whether this section should therefore require the city to give notice when a plan has been proposed by staff, no building yet, we don't know if it's brick or high roofs or low roofs, but when a plan has been proposed by staff, which by its nature will conflict with the underlying zoning restrictions, particularly would, in its concept, be a planned development, such as this building, for instance. Under those circumstances, and I'm going to use the library parking lot, not because I don't understand that the plan is to make it private, but take that lot as an example. If a decision is made to use that lot for some city use, and we don't yet have a building concept, but we know it's going to be there, and it's going to be on that big lot, on that central law. Should the city be required to give notice as it would for a planned development at that early request for proposal stage, so that you do not, as I say, get into an equitable argument later that, well, we thought we were going to get, we thought it was going to be this or this or this if it were private, or if it were public, it's simply non-conforming without required input at that point. Now, that's a question. I mean, it's a question. What?
Yeah,
how-
I
is
think
that-
that's.
Would that be in this ordinance, and why wouldn't it be?
Well, I think that that's something takes a little bit of discussion.
agree.
It's not a
I'm not
yes or,
asking
yes or no.
Scott to answer
That's
it.
kind of the whole
Yeah, it is.
reason that we're here,
That's
kind
what I
of
think,
thing. And
too.
I mean, there are certain issues about plan developments and scale and
Yeah.
timing and things that.
But that
and
one is not
use and-
resolved, particularly not with the drafting of C1.
Yeah, maybe, okay. All right, any other questions? All right, so is there anyone, now we'll move on to public testimony. Is there anyone who would like to make a statement about the proposed text amendment? Okay, you've got it again. All right.
Making up for being absent for your earlier meetings. Joan Safford, 1618 Wesley Avenue, once again. I submitted to each of you a draft or a proposed draft, making changes, many of which are better written in the version that is now coming from the city. My concerns were a combination of grammar, which have all been solved, and of the confusion of the first paragraph A, which has been solved now by making reference to, I put subject to special procedures to set forth in this section, that now says subject to procedures set forth in section D, same deal. And then reintroducing the idea that this has to be a necessary or desirable service, which had been left out altogether in the draft. It's back in now. So I don't really have any quarrels, and in section D, I have basically the same thing as you do, and it's, I don't know whether it's more felicitously or less felicitously written, but it's not something which I would be prepared to fight. I would just say that the work you've done since August is really important, because the way it was written made it look as though there was no place to intercede. The second comment I'd like to make is that DAPR is a terrific organization, but it meets in the afternoon. It doesn't really have a place for public testimony, and therefore does not have the same opportunities that the Plan Commission has for receiving public comment. And which brings me to the third point, which is if there are going to be two hearings, the first of which is before DAPR, and I think we've touched on whether that's what's needed, but the first one, which is before DAPR, and the second of which is before DAPR, and you're changing over to following the procedures for a planned development, it seems to me that you still need that first hearing before whatever body you decide it would be before, and the second hearing would be before, if it were the equivalent of a planned development, the second hearing would be before the Plan Commission, rather than having it before DAPR on both occasions. And third, which sort of incorporates D and C, and let I'm like you, Commissioner Isaac, I'm losing my third point. Oh, and that I think the word notice should be inserted in any case where you just have that it will provide the process for review of plan developments. I think it should read expressly, provide the process for notice and review, because the notice provisions for a plan development are 1,000 feet. So I think that would be an important additional change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I know this isn't a question, Mr. Time, but I think that the intent is that it would follow all the procedures of 636. So that would include
The 1,000-foot notice.
the 1,000-foot notice, the notice in the newspaper, DAPR recommendation to the Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council.
Okay,
So
yes.
the intent is it'd be the full plan development process.
So you just saved me from asking you that question to clarify that issue. So notice is redundant because notice is part of that inherent process of a PUD, of a planned development, PD. But 1,000 feet. So by saying it's just part of the shall follow 6.3, what is it, the plan development process, that requires public notice and to a larger radius. So it's inclusive.
I understand
Yeah.
that that's inclusive, but the word notice is a useful, helpful, civic word to use, even if it's
Yeah.
redundant.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, we'll close the public hearing portion of the hearing and open it up to commissioner deliberations. Does anyone have any comments or discussions? Commissioner Isaac, you were the chair of the zoning committee. Would you like to kind of share what was the outcome or what you see the key issues that were undone?
Well, in the committee meeting, we went through a lot of this language, and I think the changes in here represent what we came together as a consensus, as what should be what should be modified. There was talk about removing the municipal exemption entirely, but ultimately this was, the changes you're seeing are what were the consensus view of the committee. I do recall in our meeting that we did discuss timing of notice, and so that has not made it into this draft. But I think we would be do well to include revisions to those that subsection 1 and 2, saying that the city will issue notice at least 15 days, as opposed to just will provide. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and obviously one of the big things that we had discussed was the effective size of the project, which is reflected in the note, the reference to the plan development procedure.
Absolutely. Previously, or under the current ordinance, any use is allowable by the city without any review. And part of the discussion at the committee meeting was that if the use is going to be so extensive or so burdensome where it would otherwise be required to go through the plan development process, that it was the committee's feeling that the city should have to present that to the public just like any other any other developer or, landowner would have to.
Right. Any other comments or deliberations? All right, so I believe that we're discussing the amendment as proposed on the screen and not in the packet, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. All right, so all right, it is, I guess, if there's nothing else, we should probably go against the standards, discuss the standards.
Okay. We have 4 standards that must be met for the text amendments. The first of which being whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Comprehensive General Plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. And finally, the adequacy of public facilities and services.
So let us state for that since this is a citywide recommendation and has no specific site or timing, that I think we're going to have to review it under that guise. So whether it's consistent with the amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Comprehensive General Plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council. Yes, I mean, it is part of the operations of the city. Any counter arguing? No? Okay, so let's say that that's satisfied. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. So I would propose that the wording that says that there are protections in place in the wording that says the city takes reasonable steps to minimize adverse effects on surrounding properties resulting from such non-compliances, if it is that there is language there to help protect and make this satisfied. Agreed?
Yes.
Agreed.
All right. All right. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. Well,
No. I'm sorry.
Not satisfied?
It is satisfied.
It is-
would not have an adverse effect.
and that is because a general increase in the amount of services that the city provides adds to the benefit of the entire community, or what?
Just more notice and more public participation
I see.
can't be
Can't be-
adverse.
Can't
to
be
the effect
adverse
of-
from that lens, yes, okay. I think that's satisfied. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect, the adequacy of public facilities and services, and that would be determined on a case-by-case basis by staff. So we'll say that that is satisfied. So with that, we've discussed, we're talking about recommending approval or approval with modification or recommendation for denial of the language that was proposed on the screen, not that was submitted in your packet. We had discussion of inserting some modifications to insert time limit for the notice in it, and I think that was the major variance from as submitted. Is that right? So is there anyone who would like to make a motion?
Chair Lewis, to be clear on the process, if there's a motion to approve the language as set forth on the screen, and that motion is seconded, at that time, someone could propose an amendment to that language, and that would be discussed and voted on before we vote on the. Okay. Just want to make sure that's the process.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Chair Lewis, I move that the modifications to the municipal use exemption as proposed and set forth in the staff's packet, in the staff's presentation tonight, be approved and recommended to the city council.
Second?
Seconded Goddard. All right, having a motion moved and seconded, are there any comments or amendments or modifications that one would propose to the motion?
Chair Lewis?
Yes. Commissioner Isaac, thank you.
I move that the language in subsection C1 and C2 in the first line of each such subsection, the words "will provide" be amended to read "will issue, comma, at least." I'm sorry. Let me start over. It should read the city, prior to the city council approval of the project, or in item number 2, prior to the construction of the project, then the city will issue notice of the design and project review committee meeting at least 15 days prior to such meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Seconded. Hugo. All right. Any other comments, amendments, modifications? So I think we're ready to vote on it. Is that right?
I think so.
All right. Let's have a roll call.
I believe you'll vote on the amendment first, and then on the motion as amended.
All right. So we will vote first on the amendment, and then on the motion, and then we'll vote on the amendment to the motion.
Chair Lewis, I think it's the other way around.
Other way around.
Yeah, other way around.
Amendment.
All right.
Okay. Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin?
Aye.
Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Lewis?
Aye.
So the amendment passes.
All right. So the amendment to the, no, so the, whatever it is.
The motion as.
The motion,
the
yes,
amendment to the
yes.
The amendment to the motions.
The amendment to the motion, yes. As amended.
No, we're voting
No,
on
the-
amendment.
So-
we just voted on the
The
amendment.
amendment,
So now it's
so-
the motion as amended.
Okay, the motion as amended. All right, there we go. Let's vote on as
Okay.
amended.
Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin?
Aye.
Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Lewis?
Aye.
That passes as well.
All right, so the motion passes unanimously. All right, so that concludes the text amendment PLND 0077. So the second item on the agenda is a text amendment for accessory dwelling units 19 PLND 0097. I believe, Mr. Mangum, you're presenting.
So we're going to have a presentation tonight by both the Evanston Development Cooperative and then staff. So Dick Coe will, I think, start off with the presentation, and then staff will follow up with some of the technical amendments that are proposed.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners and Scott Megan. My name is Dick Coe. I'm the president of the Evanston Development Cooperative, resident of the 7th Ward. So the Evanston Development Cooperative is a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We are a worker, employee-owned cooperative. Our vision is to engage Evanston residents in meaningful intergenerational and collaborative societal progress. Our mission is to construct high-performing, practical ADUs and sensible housing using a locally trained workforce. And our values are sensible housing, job creation, community wealth, racial equity, sustainability, and democratic ownership. After I left Northwestern as a faculty member, I co-founded this with Robbie Marcus, EDC as we call it. And we've been, you may have seen or read about us, we are really focused, we've focused our efforts around coach houses, accessory dwelling units, and backyard homes. And why ADUs? There are many reasons for it. We wanted to highlight two national efforts that one on the left, New York Times, talking about in California, using that to answer the housing shortage, and the Washington Post on the right, talking about Portland, Oregon, as another city that has really adopted accessory dwelling units. And both of these address why ADUs can help address the housing shortage and also provide homeowners with more flexible housing options. And we've been in existence since early 2019. We incorporated in December of 2018 as a cooperative here in Illinois. And since throughout the year, we have been engaged community members through various events at ward meetings and also city council meetings. And on just about 2 weeks ago, we hosted a backyard home walking tour. We posted it on Facebook, and more than 90 people signed up to see what accessory dwelling units are like in the Chicago Dempster area. And last week we had a panel that we co-hosted with the AARP, who also is leading a national effort around ADUs. And there invited community members. We had nearly 40 people show up to this event at the Levy Center last week. So through that community engagement, we also have partnered with the city as one of the awardees of the Cities of Opportunity selection with the National League of Cities that Robbie and Alderman Ruth Simmons and Director Ike Agbo and Sarah Flax were at last week in Washington, D.C., focused on accessory dwelling units. So just to highlight the way we understand it, current Evanston ADU zoning today is allowable in all residential zoning districts. Currently, it's only allowed behind single-family residences and homes. It needs to have vehicle access, whether it's through the alley or a driveway. And the building height, if you are not in the historic district, is 20 feet for a slanted roof and 14.5 for a flat or mansard roof. And if you're in the historic district, it's 28 feet or 3/4 of the main house. And also an additional off-street parking space is required when you construct the additional dwelling unit. As we engage Evanston members, we are hearing why this can be challenging. So some of the community feedback we've gotten are fairness of a single family only restriction, that a coach house or ADU is only allowed behind a single family residence. Currently, 2 flat owners who want to build an ADU cannot. We've also heard from residents is that it's hard to construct a all ground level accessory dwelling unit when the additional parking spot, off-street parking space is required. Forces the owner to build a 2-story accessory dwelling unit with stairs, and that limits the opportunity to age in place. And we've also heard feedback from the community that by limiting it to 20 feet and dormering it out, we're increasing the construction cost and oftentimes also avoiding the manufacturer's warranty on the roofing material because of the pitch. But we see people do that all the time, of course. So I just want to highlight 2 emails we've gotten from community members. One is from a 5th Ward resident, and I'll just read what's highlighted and bolded. It's, I own a 2-flat in Evanston, and we have a portion of land on our property that might be just right for a small coach house or a single person to reside. And on the next paragraph, there's a shed on that land right now, but we don't use it and we don't need it. I'm looking forward to your reply. The people are thinking, well, can they do more with their land to provide a public benefit? And this two-flat owner currently would not be able to construct an ADU. And this note is from a First Ward resident saying, the rationale for this project would be so that my wife and I can have a smaller residence in Evanston, i.e. downsizing as seniors, and stay here beyond the 36 years so far. This project stopped because they started looking at the zoning and realizing that they would have to build their dwelling unit on the second floor, and they said that's just not really our aging in place option. And lastly, I just wanted to show you, looking at the two flats, we looked at Cook County data of all the two flats and looking at zoning. So we were able to look at individual lots to see what fits, what complies to zoning today by right. So these are where the current two flats are. And some of the arguments we've heard is that allowing two flat owners to build coach houses and ADUs would be more equitable, because most of the coach houses are, the two flats are, of course, in R3 zoning. So we want to be able to open that opportunity and expand affordable housing options to all those residents as well. And that's the end of our presentation. I'm happy to answer questions now or later.
Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Coe?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Is there any consideration to whether with respect to like a two flat, whether the two units are currently permitted or whether they're like legal non-conforming?
On what part, you mean like from?
If there's a two flat
Yes.
existing in an R1 district where you couldn't make it a two flat today, if you were building it today, you wouldn't be able to put a two flat, but it's a two flat because it's a grandfathered in.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, there's already two units on a lot where only one is otherwise allowed. Under your proposal, are you suggesting that that homeowner or that property owner be allowed to have a third unit on that same property, or should some distinction be made?
Great question. I don't know if Scott, you're better positioned to answer that, or I can provide.
Yeah, and I think the regulations as they're written, and we'll get to those in the next part of the presentation, do not distinguish between those two situations.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so if there's nothing else,
Yeah, and I'll wait.
why don't we wait and let the presentation continue? So
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. Mr. Mangum.
Good evening, Chair Lewis, members of the Plan Commission, members of the public. So building off of Mr. Coe's presentation, I'll go through some of the solutions or proposed changes to the code to address some of the hardships that have been identified in developing ADUs. A little bit of background where this particular request came from. At the Planning Development Committee meeting on September 23rd, there was discussion, again, around these same type of issues of how to develop more ADUs and some of the current roadblocks. There was discussion among the committee, and then it was referred to the Plan Commission for further discussion. Generally was pretty supportive with some concern over parking requirements in some areas in the first ward were brought up. But the committee did not make a recommendation one way or the other on that. They wanted the Plan Commission to have more discussion on that issue before it came back to them. So where we are with the current regulations, right now there's a definition for coach house. As you may remember, last year there were some changes to this definition. Coach houses are a building type that have existed in Evanston for a very long time. I'd say back to at least to the 1800s. So that it is a traditional building type that's existed. It had been interpreted that building type being accessory to the principal structure, the house on the lot, could only have either family members of that house or some sort of connection between the two, if there was a nanny, for example, living in there. So that was fairly restrictive, that owners could not rent those out to the general public. So that was something that we saw as being an impediment to development of new coach houses or accessory dwelling units. So that change was made last year. Now we're looking at some additional tweaks to the ordinance. So the first of which is that definition of coach house. You'll see the proposed new language underlined, and then the proposed old language to be removed with a strike through there. So it would read that a single detached secondary or accessory dwelling unit located on the same zoning lot as a principal residential structure, including a garage. Tenants of coach houses may be unrelated to the owners of the principal residential structure. Maximum of one coach house is allowed per zoning lot. So that addresses that it's not one per single family dwelling, but as was mentioned, if you have a two flat, then there could be also a coach house on that lot. In our section 6462, which are general provisions for accessory uses and structures, just adding the language for the section that currently deals with special regulations for garages to for that section to deal with garages and coach houses. And we'll get to that section. There's a table within 6463 that currently states kind of where a variety of accessory uses or accessory buildings can be located on lots, which yards those can be located in. So the side or the rear yard in both residential and non-residential districts are where accessory dwelling units currently are allowed. And right now it's stated accessory dwelling units to single-family detached homes. So again, the proposed language is to remove that single-family detached homes and add to the principal residential structure. So then it would apply for a two flat or three flat that could have a coach house as well. And then the red language in here is language that's been added since the packet went out. So we had some additional minor refinements. Again, because the definition is in the zoning code is for a coach house, we thought that coach house language should be within this section here to clarify that. Within 6464, these are special regulations right now applicable to garages. We would add coach houses as well. So the language you see on here is just add coach houses at the end of those. They are differentiated right now into areas where there are Evanston landmarks and historic districts. So currently within those districts, all these regulations are there. So you can build with a increased height in those residential historic districts. This matches some of the existing pattern out there. A lot of the homes in these districts are larger homes. So there's some proportional, relational, additional height that's allowed with the coach houses. So no taller than 3/4 the height of the principal structure, measured to the roof, but not to exceed 28 feet. So none of those regulations are proposed to be changed. It's just adding the new section title and coach houses. Now the new section that would be added is to allow for additional height for properties that are not an Evanston landmark or located within historic districts. So if you're not within those, currently there's no ability to have additional height. So this section is proposed that if you have increased setbacks, essentially you'd be given the ability to increase the height up to the 20 feet. So in this case, 20 feet for a mansard roof or flat roof, and then up to 28 feet at peak for a sloped roof. And then the language that's clarified here is a setback from every property line that directly abuts another property. So for example, if you had an interior property in a block, and so you've got a neighbor on either side of you, and let's say an alley behind you, you would not need any additional setback from the alley because it abuts a right-of-way. However, from each property owner on either side, if you set it back, so you bring the building towards the middle of the lot, so providing additional setback, at that point you'd be allowed 1 additional foot of height for every 1 additional foot in from either side property, for both side property lines. And then finally, Some amendments are proposed to the parking requirements. It'd be Table 16B of the zoning ordinance. So right now, one parking space is required for each dwelling unit within the coach house. The proposal is to create some caveats or some areas where that parking would not be required. So if the coach house meets the affordability criteria, which is below, or transit-oriented criteria, no parking space is required. And the transit-oriented criteria is met if coach house is within a designated TOD area or within 1,000 feet of a Metro Pace, CTA, bus or train station. And then secondly, the parking space would not be required if the affordability criteria is met, that at the time of the construction, the household income of the owner that builds the coach house is at or below 80% of area median income, or if it's the principal structure or coach house is rented at or below 80% AMI for a period of 10 years. And then we do have some supplemental information, the TOD maps you may be somewhat familiar with around our existing train stations. Currently, we have lower parking restrictions in those areas. And then additionally, mapped out is 1,000 foot around each of the transit stations or bus stops there. So that's a summary of the proposed text changes to implement those changes that are requested. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mangum. Are there any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Hugo.
Yes, first I really very much support this, these changes, but just had a technical question on table 16B, the third paragraph. It says affordability criteria is met if at any time, at the time of coach house construction, the household income of the owner that builds a coach house is at or below 80% of the AMI. Just a technical question. If construction begins in September of 19, terminates in April of 20, and the income has changed, they met AMI at the start of construction, but then got a big bonus the second year and didn't. What's the period at which one looks at the owner's income? Is it the point of construction, beginning of construction? Is it when you completed construction, got all the various permits, time of you first rent it? You could, in theory, could construct it and not rent it out for a year or two. What's the relevant time to look at the owner's income?
It's a good question, Commissioner. I think the most practical way to do it would be at the time of permit issuance. So that would be something to be reviewed if they're requesting to construct this without parking. We would request that income documentation at that time and review that before the building permit would be issued.
Because I will offer that as an amendment, perhaps once the motion's on the floor. And the second is the affordability criteria is met if the unit is rented at or below 80% of AMI for a period of 10 years. So you build the unit, you don't have parking space, and there's no way to have parking space, physically, let's assume. You rent it out for 8 years at 80%, and then the ninth year, it's at 85%. At that point, you've got your thing, it's built. There's no parking that can be built. What happens at that point? I guess you can't rent it, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't force someone to put in parking because there's no more room. Is there any, just a practical question?
Another good question, consideration. For some other projects where affordability has been a requirement, for example, some zoning variation cases, a covenant is required to be recorded. So that would be the documentation, the mechanism that would require it. Now, as far as the what you do if someone is not, I think that they'd probably be in violation of the zoning ordinance, so it'd probably revert to the penalties in the zoning ordinance.
And so just following up on that, so what is the process that's used to monitor the rental rates, and who enforces that criteria? How is that even, enforced?
It's a good question. I don't know that I know all the mechanics of it. They do work with our housing grant staff as far as recording the information. And I know there is a third party the city contracts with that verifies income for projects. I don't know if they would be required to use that necessarily. So I think that is a good question. We can look into more of the compliance side of that.
Okay. Any, Commissioner Isaac?
I have a question, and I'm going to use an example close to home.
Your home?
Correct.
Yes.
The neighbor that is just east of my rear lot line, they face a different street because I'm on a corner. Their house is built immediately on the lot line. My garage is 3 feet off the lot line, okay? And my garage is an accessory, structure. Given that the structure is there, it seems to me that I would be allowed to turn my garage into a coach house, but it would, well, let me just pose that question. Would I be able to turn my garage into a coach house? Even though that accessory structure isn't, 10 feet away from another principal structure in 6'4", 6'2", it's, let's say it's not 3 feet, let's say it's 2.5 feet away off the lot line. And so it's violating those requirements, right, under the accessory building section, but it's existing. So it's a legal non-conforming structure. My neighbor is, okay with it because it's currently a garage. But let's just say it's no longer a garage and now it's a coach house and there's people living 2.5 feet away from their house. So it would seem to me that, like, I could do that and there's nothing the neighbor could say. Am I missing something?
I think to some extent it depends whether there's construction involved. If you already had a 2-story volume in your garage and had a workshop upstairs or an office upstairs or something to that, and you didn't need any construction.
I'm going to pave another portion of my lot for parking, and the garage is going to become a coach house. It's going to become a 1 or 1.5 story coach house. I maybe will dormer some of the existing roof, but not making any other changes to it.
So if there's construction and you're increasing that nonconformity, by increasing the height or building out that second story more, at that point I believe you would need to comply with the current setback regulations. So in order to do that, you need to request a variation.
Okay.
But I think he's stating it's just an interior remodeling. It's turning the existing garage structure into an ADU. The
Sure,
only
so-
construction would be paving, assuming he meets the coverage requirements of open on-lot parking.
Yeah.
Yes, if you already have the dormers and the physical space, for the living area plus the 3 required parking spaces, I don't believe anything new would be required.
Okay. So kind of hinging on the parking aspect, what is the requirement of a single family, or then we'll get into the questions for duplex properties for the base, so a property that's a single family residence with an accessory dwelling unit in the back, if there are no exceptions for parking, would be required to have how many spaces? I.e., what is the base amount of spaces for the dwelling unit? And then the accessory unit is 1+, right? So
Correct. So single-family detached dwelling is required 2 parking spaces, and then 1 parking space is
so
required currently for a coach
You'd have to have
house.
3 if there was no modification.
Correct.
Okay. And then can I ask, since Commissioner Isaac brought up the idea of duplexes, are they always one zoning lot with 2 residential units, or are they or are they sometimes two separate zoning lots with a common wall? I mean, they're usually two separate property index numbers, are they not? They're not a co-op by any nature, so are they actually two separate lots and treated individually? This would get to the point that, could you have two accessory dwelling units on there, or would it be just one? If they were a combined one property, then it would be one additional, so three total dwelling units. Or if they're not on the same in their kind, then it's four.
So if they were on this, so a zoning lot can be different than a platted lot or lot of record. So there could be two pins, but if they're developed at the same time as one zoning lot, even if they're two pins, it'd be considered one zoning lot. So in that case, there'd be one coach house that could be allowed.
So that's usually the case with how duplexes are developed, as one zoning lot, one.
I'd say usually there's a variety of, in a built out in an old community like Evanston, there's a variety of different circumstances.
Okay. So it's hard to know. Yeah, no, it's hard to know. No, it's, okay. So any other questions at this time? Okay, so So at this time, I need to just mention that any person or groups with an ownership leasehold interest of a property within 500 feet, or for in the case of amendments, which is this case, I would believe of well, it's not even an amendment. Well, it is a text amendment. Can ask for a continuance if they do so in writing, in which case the case could be moved to a date certain in the future. So is there anyone requesting a continuance? All right, thank you. So now I will open it up for questions from the public. We have one person signed up. Mr. Shapiro, this is for questions, not statements. Do you have any questions? Well, you can do both. Yeah. Not at the same time. Well, okay. Well, there we go. There we go. Okay, it's public comment time. So no questions, though. No questions, just comments.
Let me start. Ben Shapiro, 1127 Dewey Avenue, which is a R3 zoned two-flat built in 1960, which I have purchased 2 years ago and have been remodeling ever since. It is my primary source of revenue. I am retired. I do receive Social Security. Thank you, FDR. And before I go any further, I do want to commend you on your struggles with Robert's Rules of Order. As a member of the library board, we have the same issues all the time. So I feel for you guys. Two comments I'd like to make about this. First is the height of the building. Given that our winters are now inching towards starting in July instead of in January, the higher ceiling that a 28-foot or 3/4 height of the existing, my building is 35 feet tall, would allow more overhead in a building where the one-bedroom or studio apartment was above a garage. And my intention is, under this ordinance, to build a 3-car garage and then have a one-bedroom or a studio apartment above it that I would move into, so I could reap the economic benefit of renting out the 3-bedroom apartment that my Labrador and I currently reside in and only use half of. So I'd like to make a bigger space available for people to move into Evanston in, while having a habitable space for myself in the back of my lot. So one thing I would urge you to consider is taking the historic district level of height restrictions, 28 feet or 3/4 of the existing building, and applying those across the board in the ordinance instead of two different height restrictions. 14.5 feet with a garage underneath probably means that I would continue to have to shrink at an accelerated rate to be able to have enough room to move around inside my apartment. And given our increasing long winters, I will be spending more and more time inside. I do intend to age in place in this space. Having been an Evanston resident for 38 years, I have no desire to leave and go anywhere else. The other point I would urge you to consider more closely is, sorry, like everyone else, I'm losing my train of thought. The distance to, I am currently 1,536 feet according to Google Maps from the closest MetroPace CTA bus stop. On the other side of Dodge for me is the main Dempster Plaza. It would seem reasonable in the cases where there is a large commercial development on the other side of a main route with a bus stop, that expanding the distance to the bus stop, that this would fit in, even though I am going to build a three-car garage, so that it would fit under that compliance piece for, instead of 1,000 feet, say 1,500 or 2,000 feet, would expand more into the Evanston West End area, where there are a number of small two-flats, but with large backyards, where being able to do this for affordable housing would make a great deal of sense and improve, I think, the economic opportunities for many of my fellow residents in that part of town. So I'm well outside of the TOD areas, but not too far from Dodge, but just far enough not to benefit from the 1,000-foot radius. I didn't get a close enough look at the map when you showed it, so I think I missed by about, yeah, my eyesight's not that good. I missed by about a block. So being on Dewey, Grandmother Park is on the south, to give you a location, I'm on the north side of Grandmother's Park. So those are my 2 points. If we could expand the roof height to 28 feet max or 3/4, whichever is less, if that works for you, and the distance for the exclusion from the one car, the one parking space addition to 2,000 feet from a bus stop. Though I do intend fully to build a 3-car garage underneath, because that's what my 33-foot wide lot would allow me to do. Okay. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think that closes the public comment portion, and we'll move into commissioner deliberations. So who would like to talk? Commissioner Dubin.
I would suggest that we also expand the area that you don't have to provide an off-street parking space for. 1,000 feet isn't that much. Many people, walk 4 miles to school each way barefoot in the snow, so I think you shouldn't, I think it's a hardship if you're trying to provide affordable housing to then have to provide the parking space. Although I know some people will still have cars, I think we should be a little more expansive.
So obviously the counter argument is that where would the cars go if people they don't, not necessarily going to use the public transportation.
Right,
And
but-
even if they do, they may own a car. And so, especially if you're on a busy street like Dodge, where on many parts parking is limited, that you would then park on the neighborhood street, and then the neighborhood streets are also, having increased parking capacity. So how do you, how do you deal with the
It's an issue.
counter?
It's a big
the
issue.
counter?
And remember the apartments on the corner of Chicago and Main, southeast corner? There was no parking in that neighborhood due to the number of older multi-story buildings. And when those buildings went in, and the new buildings went in on those two corners, they were given the variance that they didn't have to provide as much parking as zoning would require. It's a problem everywhere, and I don't feel that we should, if we want to provide affordable housing and you have a car, sorry, you have to work it out somehow. Many people do. Not to sound cruel.
Anyone else saying Anything? So I have a question. So has anyone done any kind of tests of how beneficial the height bonus as proposed would be on lots within Evanston? I mean, you mentioned, Mr. Shapiro, you have a 33-foot lot. So you're required to have 3-foot setbacks on each side, which gives you 27 feet to put it in. And then parking spaces are what? You have to have 12 feet for a parking space in a garage to still have clearances as a decent number. I mean, no one builds a garage that's smaller than 24 by 24 for a 2-car garage, although you can get away with 10. So that would give you 3 additional feet that you could set back from 27 to, so you have 27 feet. So you would have 3 9-foot stalls to put that in and no height bonus, right? So you would be limited to 14.5 feet.
Yes,
And
that
so,
would be living like this.
right, so you need 8 feet for so there's not enough space to actually make anything happen under this ordinance. So
It
your
would be very
case
cramped.
fails.
Yeah. I did a little research into recommended sizes for car stalls, and it's about 9 feet. I wouldn't be putting a truck in there, it would be, and the way my floor plan that I've worked out looks is that it would actually be 2.5 cars, but deep enough so that the DeLorean my son is restoring in my garage could be at the front end of one stall.
Yeah.
And when necessary, my car could be behind it, and then there would be a third space then available for my renter.
It's going to be narrow.
It's going to be narrow.
Narrow spaces.
But they're not expected
But
to live in there.
But the point is I'm not sure that that this bonus is actually a viable bonus that will be beneficial to the way it's written to
Right.
achieving that second story.
Right. The way the ordinance is proposed is that I'd have to give up 1 foot of width for every foot of height that I gain. So to be able to have a suitable extensively undormered roof,
Yeah.
I would end up in a 6-foot wide space.
Yeah, or a two-car
garage with
two-car
maybe a
garage,
pad
and then
next
you
to it.
would need the exemption for the parking.
Right.
Right,
So
so,
the way, without that height, it becomes very difficult to make a livable space
Right.
on the second floor.
right. And so I've been told that the typical lot, or many of the lots in this area west of Asbury in the R3 and area is about 35 feet as a
Yes.
minimum lot. So that in essence is 2 feet difference than what you're getting. So even if they would do that, they're to a 16-foot,
Yeah.
it's not really practical, even dormer. By the way, where is the height of a sloped roof measured to the apex of the dormer?
It'd be to the top of the roof, which would be the 20 feet,
The
if it were the
ridge
flat
line,
roof.
The ridge line.
Yes.
Not the eave, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
okay.
It's a grade. So my way around it would be to put my garage below grade, which, given I'm on the downslope of the floodplain, not a good idea.
Yeah, and you can't ramp to get into
No.
can't ramp to get into it, and in a snowy climate like this, it's ridiculous to
Even though I try and
ramp
live car
into.
free. Yes.
So that's a question or a concern that I have with the ordinance as it's written, is it, I would definitely want to encourage a second floor, but would want something that's actually practical and able to be achieved by most homeowners within the area to get 19, 20 feet, which would be required in order to put a habitable second floor on their garage. Commissioner Isaac.
If we're talking about changing the height limitations for accessory structures, it wouldn't just be for a coach house. It would be for garages as well. And I'm not saying one way or the other, because in the past I've wanted to build a larger garage and haven't to date. But I do know that it's, it's 20 feet, across the city, except for in landmark districts. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we're considering modifying that section, we need to think about the unintended consequences of that issue, right? Like, if there is a house in the neighborhood that has mainly single-family home, ranch homes. There aren't many in Evanston, but they're there. And then to have the neighbor puts in a 28-foot accessory structure in the back, which is ultimately bigger than the principal structure. And so, if we're looking to toy with the height limitations, I think it would take further discussion and more thought before we were to consider something like that.
Yeah, I would say that there are quite a few areas such as Oakton, west of Dodge, north of Oakton, that's almost all single-story ranch area. And again, you could have two-story buildings popping up in the back of there. Don't know if that's bad or not, but it's the case that you could have that. What else is anyone concerned about with the language here? So I have a general question. The way the ordinance is crafted, it talks about, and I think Mr. Coe, you mentioned that aging in place is a ground level activity, right? I mean, I agree. So you're optimistic, Mr. Shapiro, to be able to climb stairs until you're 95. God bless you. That nothing in this allows for creating ground level accessory dwelling units, because there is still that basic requirement for parking within the property. Unless you build a garage and then the dwelling unit behind it and then have no backyard, or essentially, that kind of an arrangement. So just wondering, has anyone thought about this in your studies of California or Seattle? Has anyone solved this kind of relation of parking to ground level occupancy? Yeah, if you could please come up.
Yeah, first, thank you all so much for taking the time to discuss this issue. My name is Robbie Marcus. I'm a co-founder and the vice president of the Evanston Development Cooperative. To my knowledge, the state of California in 2016 or 2017 passed statewide legislation on accessory dwelling units, and the primary stipulation relating to parking was that the parking was waived. This was the city of Los Angeles. The parking was waived if you were within a half mile of public transit. So obviously, if we were to do that in the city of Evanston, I think that would be the entire city. I have not, in my research of municipalities that build accessory dwelling units and have passed zoning policy relating to ADUs, such as Austin, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, Boston, seen any specific zoning policy relating to parking for the purpose of helping aging residents age in place. If the Plan Commission is interested, my first guess would be research on Santa Cruz, California. They have really built out accessory dwelling units there specifically for aging seniors, and offer loans for income qualifying seniors that want to age in place in their community. So I would imagine that they have zoning standards that allow aging homeowners to do that.
So I guess my question was, again, this is probably not fair to be asking you, but that we have a requirement for 2 parking spaces just for the primary dwelling unit. So even if you rescind the requirement for the accessory use, we still have to get 2 units on, 2 parking spaces, and that's taking over half the width of the typical 35-foot space. So we're getting very thin little accessory dwelling units.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, my thought would be based on the Evanston Development Cooperative's research, around a third of Evanston's properties would, under current building lot coverage requirements, be able to build a ground level accessory dwelling unit with the current parking requirements for homeowners to age in place. And I'd appreciate hearing Dick's thoughts on it too. My assumption would be that if you waived one additional parking spot and were able to build a 2-car garage, my thought would be that just rough estimate, 200 to 300 more homeowners might be able to age in place. Dick, does that roughly seem correct to you? Yeah.
All right, so there is an ability to, you've estimated how many people can actually do ground level housing.
Yeah, and if, we're interested in furthering this conversation, the Evanston Development Cooperative is happy to do some more detailed research to, give the Plan Commission a better picture of how the policy would affect homeowners.
Commissioner Draper.
I have a question back on going on these hypotheticals. So if you're in an existing building that was not built with a garage and you put one in later, and now you've decided you're going to convert it to a coach house, there wasn't parking spots initially. Does that make anything different, or you basically always need to have 2 parking spots once you build that garage?
Yeah, I think once you provide the 2 parking spaces and come into compliance, you wouldn't be able to remove that parking without variance.
So really, we are dealing with an issue that unless we get the height requirement up, we can't have anything at grade for not all the lots, but a big majority of the smaller lots right now. So if it was a bigger lot, maybe you would be able to have a garage and a dwelling unit. But for all the ones that are the smaller size, it's just not possible.
Yeah, so it's the R1 zone, especially east toward the lake, it seems to have larger lots, but as soon as you get west into a lot of these areas that were targeted on your map, they're smaller, narrower lots and get into this same issue. So that was my concern. I mean, it's obviously not such a problem on wide lots that you can have plenty of setback, but please.
Again, Dick Ho from the Evanston Development Cooperative. So we looked at single-family lots in Evanston, about 10,000 of them. We integrated the principal structure, looking at the building lot coverage, and matched that to the zoning district. And we're currently, 1,600 square feet will give us the 600 square feet for the 3 off-street parking spots, and an additional 1,000 square feet to build a ground-level unit. So if we were to say, if that additional spot was not required, going down to, so just needing a 2-car garage of 400, and then let's say again 1,000, that would add 450 opportunities. So 450 more homeowners would be able to build a ground-level coach house.
Okay, and you also looked at this in relationship to the lot coverage?
Yes. And this is specifically using publicly available map data to look at.
Okay. Commissioner Isaac?
Yeah, but if you're looking at it only from a lot coverage standpoint, that doesn't necessarily take into account how much space there is behind the building, right?
Correct.
So
We did not
so-
look at the rear yard
so
and 40% of that.
Yeah, so like 450 is the top number, and it's likely much smaller than that, right? Because there's some lots you just won't be able to fit it in, even though there's a lot to be and then there's land to be covered, but it's not in the right place for you to fit everything in the way you'd want to.
Yes.
Okay.
So we did not specifically look at rear yard and how many of that would not exceed the 40% limit. But just anecdotally, we've met with probably 60 homeowners individually looking at it. All just, I would say 98, most of them do not exceed the rear yard 40% limit. Most do fall under, it's the building lot coverage or impervious surface if there is a driveway that's required. But rarely does the rear yard kick it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So are there any thoughts about where we should go with this? I think we would have to have a Commissioner Isaac.
I was going to say that, overall, what the changes, the changes that are set forth in the packet, I think are an improvement to what's already there. I think we've identified problems with putting this into practice. I don't know that I'm prepared to, address those problems in this meeting today, but if we were inclined to, recommend approval to the City Council of the changes set forth in this packet, I think I would be in favor of that. But, straying far from what's here to address those problems, I think would be premature. There's other problems we've identified today in this hearing.
I'm sorry, so what would be premature?
Like changing the height requirements for accessory structure, height limitations on accessory structures. I think it'd be premature to
Change it beyond what is proposed, or?
well, it isn't actually being changed in what's proposed. We're just including coach houses in the definition of the height limitations for garages. This language isn't changing that, right?
But it would also, was not changing it essentially where it's a historic district already, where they are allowed the additional height based on the height of the principal structure. However, it would allow for additional height in areas where it's not a landmark or not a historic district. And that's on the slide here. So if there's additional setback provided from abutting properties, additional height could be added.
Right. And so that was my point, is that there, by the essence of the configuration of the lots, there is not that much setback that can be granted. If you need, 6 feet of setback in order to make that reasonable.
Understood.
So I was just asking, is this equation correct? Or is there an equation that can help, make this happen a little more reasonably? So, Commissioner Hugo.
I guess really the issue is how much do we want to incentivize these coach houses? And if we want to incentivize them more, then we deal with the issue you've raised, Mr. Chairman. If we're comfortable with what we have today and that's good enough, and the incentive that's being provided is good enough, then I'd certainly be prepared to move forward. I'd like to offer an amendment once the motion's on the floor in terms of the timing of the income piece, but I guess that would be the question I think the commission needs to look at is
Okay.
are we being aggressive enough here with this thing if we're really interested in promoting affordable housing? And if we really want to be aggressive, then we probably want to deal with this height issue. If we're comfortable with the level of aggressiveness that we have now, then I'd say let's move forward and let's get this coach house process moving.
So you talked a little bit about the impetus for this and the interest, that there is interest to have affordable housing. I don't know how much it is. I mean, maybe this is fine to get it going, you know. It helps in ways, so it's kind of sliding scale for where you were measuring. So I think there is a general interest in promoting it, but I don't know if it's like, we got to have it at any cost, right? It's not an emergency measure. So, so procedurally, we have to have a motion before we, so what's being proposed are, do I have to have a motion before I really go and look at the standards or can we look at the standards based on the proposed text amendment?
I think you can look at the standards based on what's proposed, and
Right.
presumably, minor modifications would still fit under the standards.
All right. So I'm getting the feeling that people are heading toward looking at this. So why don't we look at the standards against this? So these are the same standards that we applied to the previous. So whether it's consistent with the goals and objectives and policies of the comprehensive general plan is adopted and amended from time to time by the city council, I think it is meeting those goals. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development within the immediate vicinity of the subject property. In most cases, we're thinking that it would, but Commissioner Isaac brought up the question about two-story coach houses in a one-story neighborhood. So I'm not sure how language or something could be added to possibly, there could be restrictions placed for the overall character of, I'm not sure how it is. So there are setback ordinances that say the setback shall be the line of the adjacent properties, etc. So in general, I would say it is, but there are exceptions where it's not. So whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. That's not the property that's being, again, Commissioner Isaac talked about his neighbor, whether they would have concern or whether that would increase or lessen. I would tend to think that it would have little impact because it's, in most cases, we're not putting someone adjacent to an existing house. It's a rear lot or has some distance separation, so would not create a nuisance. So, and the adequacy of public facilities and services. So that includes mass transit, that includes public access to these units. So are we going to get people parking on the side of alleys and blocking alleys? Are we going to get, that might not be being served. I'm not sure. Is that?
Aren't we saying that they have to, a parking space has to be provided?
We're saying that it does not have to be provided in TODs plus within 1,000 feet of any PACE bus stop, all right, which greatly expanded the area. All right, so I'm sure there's enough electricity and they're going to have enough sewers and everything, but alley access, I'm not sure about. I can see it being abused because I would be one of those people who often pulls their car up and double parks in back of the garage and is probably, getting sworn at by the people across from me, so even though I'm just running in for a second, So anyway, I think in general it does, and we can't prove it, but I just raise some exception. So I think in general, we're finding it in compliance with the standards. All right? Okay, so based on that, is anyone willing to put forth an amendment, a motion on the text amendment?
I move we approve, recommend approval of zoning text amendment for accessory dwelling units 19 PLND 0097.
Second.
Seconded, Commissioner Isaac. All right, motion's been approved and seconded. Are there any amendments to the motion or modifications, Commissioner Hugo?
I'd like to offer an amendment for Table 16B, third paragraph. Affordability criteria is met if, at the time of, and perhaps provide the correct language, all relevant final, whatever use permit is issued for the coach house, the household income that builds it is at 80%. So it fixes the time of measurement of the household income at the moment supply the correct technical language.
I'd suggest at the time of permit issuance, building permit issuance.
That would be my suggested amendment.
Second.
Seconded. All right. Is there any discussion on the, so procedurally, we're going to vote on the amendment to the proposed amendment to the motion first, and do that up or down, and then go to the actual amendment, correct?
Chair Lewis?
Yes.
I have a second amendment.
Okay.
And wonder if
So-
you'd like to hear it now, or should we wait to vote on the First Amendment?
So thank you for complicating that.
You're welcome.
Because so if we vote up or down the First Amendment, and it's approved, then the Second Amendment could be added or not added to that. So I am thinking that the best way is to go one by one and have motion by motion, and then, all right, so,
I think that's reasonable. You can also have discussion on the amendment that's on the table now. And then
well, I would like to have discussion of that and then get into the next, so then we can vote on the First Amendment to the motion. So is there any discussion on the amendment to the motion? One. Okay, so then I think we should have a vote on the motion to modify the, yeah, you got it.
Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin? Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Lewis?
Aye.
That passes unanimously.
All right, so are there any other amendments? Commissioner Dubin, you had your light on.
I'd like to amend the parking space provision, off-street parking provision, so that it could be within a TOD or within 1,500 feet of Pace, Metra, Chicago CTA, public transit, bus stop, or train station.
All right, do I have a second? Seconded, Commissioner Hugo. All right, so any discussion on the proposed modification to the motion to, yes, anything? None? All right, so let's vote on that.
All right. Commissioner Draper? Yes. Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Lewis?
Aye. It's very arbitrary, you know? We don't know the All right, I will ask again, are there any other amendments to the motion as it stands?
Chair Lewis, I have an amendment.
Commissioner Isaac.
I move that under section 6464, the paragraph that begins coach houses not located be amended to put a limitation that the accessory structure may not be taller than the principal structure.
Instead of the 28 feet?
No, so in, under,
So that's not in the historic districts. That's the section where you grant the 1 foot set with the maximum height of 20
correct, correct. This
feet.
is, this is
Or-
the section where the bonuses for height are, bonuses for height based on providing additional setback are located. My concern is that we do not want, I do not believe that it would be proper to have an accessory structure taller than the principal structure. And so I believe there should be a limitation put on, in that section, on any attempt to build an accessory structure taller than a principal structure.
Ms. Jones, Mr. Mangum, are you clear on how that might happen? So for coach houses with flatter mansard roofs, increase 1 foot, something or other, in no case shall the height of the accessory structure exceed 20 feet or exceed the height of the principal structure?
I agree. I think that
Okay.
would be the place to put it.
Okay.
In both 1 or 2, right?
Well, in the historic districts, it's 3/4 the height of the.
No, under,
Oh, I see.
this section 1 deals with
yeah,
flat
sure,
roofs.
okay.
So I mean,
Yes.
you're either putting that same language in each of 1 and 2, or you're putting a, provided however clause after 1 and 2, saying, limiting both of them in one phrase.
All right. All right. Commissioner Hugh.
So I guess this is to deal with the ranch home issue.
Correct.
So I guess the question perhaps the cooperative has, would this negatively impact, at a macro level, the ability to achieve this low-cost housing objective that this is purported to achieve? Would this have a negative impact on what we're trying to achieve here? I hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater to protect a few ranch homers. We're going to torpedo the whole thing.
Yeah, I think the question is, what data can we get to show, is this an equitable choice? And, if you have a ranch house, are you locked out of a coach house? Because you can't go to the second floor, even with the 2 parking spots, and you say have 700 of buildable accessory footprint, you can't really do anything with it because your 2 parking spots will take up 400 of the 700, and you can't go to the second floor. So I think that could be, I don't know how many ranch-style houses are there, but I do think it'd be hard to tell a homeowner that they just don't have this option. So I think that would limit the number of more affordable units for residents who could have been here for 30, 35 years and not being able to keep their house. I do worry about that. And I also do see the challenge of having a set of height limits for the historic district and different outside. I think what Mr. Shapiro mentioned makes a lot of sense to me as a homeowner to think about, well, if we make it similar across, that is a benefit. Again, the commission can decide how much we want to incentivize and really make this easier for Evanston residents to take this option.
Thank you. So could we have, is this motion seconded and then we could discuss it? Or it's not been seconded?
Second?
Okay, it's seconded by Goddard. So, all right, so we've had some discussion. I would counter-argue that we're not just looking out for the rights of the individual homeowner, but to provide provide and maintain the contextual character of neighborhoods as they're as they have become over time. And we cite this quite often in the Central Street District or wherever, for whatever reason. And to address the 28 feet, I'm sure the only reason that was is that many of the structures would be non-conforming if they were brought down to a more reasonable level. So we would bring everything up. Is it right to bring everything up to a standard that was right, 100 years ago, but not right today? So, those are my two arguments against one, making it all 28 feet, based on the exception of history, and two, why it would be reasonable to limit it in certain areas where the contextual fabric is single-story buildings. So,
Chair Lewis, I'd like to point out that with respect to the landmark districts, there is already a limitation with respect to the principal structure, and the accessory structure is not allowed to be more than 3/4 of the principal structure. My motion does not limit it to 3/4, but is the full height of the principal structure.
So any other discussion on the motion that we add limitation to the height? Commissioner Draper, were you going to?
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. I think that's a good point to raise, that scale-wise, it is important that the rear accessory building feels like a rear accessory building. And unfortunately, you would have this scenario with ranch houses, but I agree. I think it should be less than the primary structure.
Or equal to?
Not to exceed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, come on up. Let this get out of hand. I'm famous for that, letting things get out of hand.
Revolutionary from the time
Yeah.
I was a kid. The thing which is concerning me is that this is a permitted use. The way the ordinance is written, it's simply a permitted use. That means that whatever you incorporate into this is part of that permitted use without any opportunity for the neighbors to be heard. And in the kind of neighborhood that Commissioner Isaac was talking about, and in some of the other neighborhoods which already feel impacted from parking, that may be an issue, that there is no, that it is a permitted use rather than being a special use, which would trigger the rights of the neighbors within whatever number of feet to come in and be heard and object. So that worries me as a person who's in favor of notice.
So I think that actually is a relevant point, and I think Commissioner Isaac's point about making it no larger than the primary structure gives little reason for neighbors to object if this is a permitted use. I think it would be detrimental to make everything have to go through special review, because it's a long and cumbersome and expensive process, and nothing will happen, or very few things will happen. And so that's why I agree that the ordinance should be crafted in such a way as to make it, as minimally invasive on neighbors as possible. And I would say that keeping it limited to the height of the primary, structure limits the amount of shade impact that it would have on neighbors or other kinds of things like that weren't already inherent in that zoning area. So I think that kind of helps that. So that would be my talking to that, again, in support of the height limitation aspect. So anyone else? So let's do this one, all right? Let's vote on the proposed language to add the height restriction.
Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin? Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
No.
And Chair Lewis.
Aye. So
That passes.
finally, we have one that's
5-1.
not unanimous. That's a good thing, I think. All right. So are there any other proposed amendments to the motion? All right, I think we should vote on the motion as amendment. Is there someone, how do we summarize the, is anyone willing to summarize it, or don't we have to? We all know that we have amended it 3 times to include a height limitation. What else was it? I'm sorry. Distance from transportation, increase to 15, and verification of the date, or more specificity of the date where compliance with AMI is. All right. So please call the roll.
Commissioner Draper? Commissioner Dubin? Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac?
Aye.
Commissioner Hugo?
Aye.
Chair Lewis.
Aye.
That is unanimous.
All right, so the motion passes. All right, and that concludes our hearing of case number 19 PLND 0097. So this is the public comment portion. Is anyone wanting to make a public comment? All right, I think 2 of the commissioners would like to make public comments. Why don't you, Commissioner Dubin?
Age
Please.
before beauty.
You've gotten me on both counts.
I just want to say thanks. I've really enjoyed working with everybody, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, yeah.
Frankly, I think we do.
Right. Yeah, again, for Commissioner Dubin and myself, this is our last hearing. We're off of the commission now, so I also would like to say what an honor it's been to be able to participate in forming the future, I think, of this community that I love so much, and that it's been a pleasure working with all of the commissioners, both present and past, that I've had the honor of working with, the past chairs, and certainly the staff has done an amazing job, and it's been so nice to be able to work with them. So thank you, and goodbye, everyone. So that's my comment. So
Just from a staff standpoint, I'd like to, from the city, thank you both for your service, with us and helping out advance the city's causes. Thank you.
all right, thank you very much. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Commissioner Goddard?
So move.
Yes. Second? Commissioner Dubin? All in favor? Aye. All against? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.